A nurse adjusts the machine of a patient who has been in a coma for 5 years. But the patient whispers something exciting. It is early morning at St. Hope Hospital in the interior of the United States. The hallway is almost empty. The cold lights cast shadows on the shiny floor. The air smells of disinfectant and stale coffee. The clock strikes an ungodly hour of the night. Now the body craves bed, but the soul needs to stay awake. Louisa Maria, 44, adjusts her hair, puts antibacterial gel on her hands, and holds her breath for a second. She feels the weight of the shift on her shoulders, but she carries on. Calm steps, attentive gaze, clipboard on her arm. "Good evening," Donalou whispers the guard with the cap, his voice low so as not to break the silence. "Good evening, Don Raul," she replies with a half-smile. The intensive care unit is another world. Rhythmic beeps, respirators, the whisper of air conditioning. She knows every sound. When one speeds up, her chest tightens. When they all sound the same, she breathes easy. In the background, a fan makes a constant noise, like a slow growl. Louisa walks past the beds, checks names, labels. Everything is fine. Everyone is breathing. Her hand is firm but gentle. She speaks little, and when she does, it is in a low voice, almost as if she were praying. Then she reaches the room where time stopped almost 5 years ago. The card on the door is almost empty. No last name, no address, just numbers and dates. Inside is the woman everyone in the hospital talks about with no identification. Nicknamed Mrs. X. Some call her Moon because of a small moon tattoo on her shoulder. A delicate crescent moon, as if someone had drawn it with a pencil. Louisa pushes the door open with her hip, careful not to make any noise. The room is cold. The sheet is very white. The woman lying there has fair skin, dry lips, dark hair falling to one side, tied in a poorly made braid that someone tried to fix. The monitor flashes green. The sound is constant, like a heart that doesn't want to wake up from its nap. "Good evening," Mrs. X says Louisa, as if introducing herself again, even though many nights have passed. "It's me." "Yes, Louisa, I'm here." She places the clipboard on the bedside table, turns on the spotlight, and approaches the face. She looks at the skin, the closed eyes, the breathing controlled by the machine. She takes the oximeter, checks that it is properly placed on the finger, straightens the IV tape, watches the drop fall. Everything follows the sad rhythm of the early morning. "It's cold in here, isn't it?" she says, pulling the blanket up to the patient's chest. "I don't like you shivering." We already shiver too much inside. The air conditioning persists. Louisa takes a small jar of cream out of her bag and slowly applies it to the woman's lips with a cotton swab. She also takes out a small comb and untangles a knot in her hair, as if untangling a knot in her chest. As she combs, her gaze lingers on the moon tattoo. "They call you Moon, you know," she whispers without expecting an answer. "For now, I'll keep calling you Mrs. X until you tell me what you prefer me to call you." She checks the monitor, compares it with the last entry. Everything is as expected. Expectations here are low, but they keep her feet on the ground. Louisa writes down the time, blood pressure, and temperature in simple round letters. She checks the Band-Aid. She adjusts the wires that have come loose from the skin due to cold sweat. The door cacks softly. A technician pokes her head in. "Everything's fine here, Lou. Do you need anything?" Warm water and gauze, just to clean the corner of her eye. The technician returns with what she asked for. Louisa wets the gauze and carefully cleans the edge of the eyes, as if the patient might feel a burning sensation. Her hand trembles a little, but she holds it steady. It's always like this when it comes to nameless people. It seems to hurt more. "There you go, Mrs. X. You're better now." She takes the woman's hand. It is light, cold. Louisa wraps it with both hands, like someone holding a hot cup on a freezing morning. She stays there for a few seconds, warming skin to skin. The clock in the room ticks almost imperceptibly. The sound of the IV drip marks the passing of time. Outside, the street is quiet. "I know you can't talk, but I can," she says with a slight smile. We always find a way to talk, even if it's with silence. Louisa's cell phone vibrates in her pocket. She takes it out, checks it quickly, turns off the screen, and puts it away. Nothing the world outside has to say is more urgent than this woman lying here. She turns her attention back to her, adjusts the pillow. That's better for your neck. If it bothers you, let me know in your own way. She lets out a soft sigh when she sees a wrinkle in the sheet. She smooths it with her hand, pulls it, stretches it as if it were a hotel bed. She knows no one is watching, but she is, and she needs it to be perfect, not out of obsession, but out of respect. "Donau coffee?" her colleague asks from the doorway. "If I drink it, my heart will start dancing with these machines." "Better later," she replies with a soft laugh, and her colleague disappears down the hallway with equally soft steps. Louisa starts talking again, as if telling a simple story to pass the time. "It rained today. I arrived with my jacket all wet. The bus was full. A man gave me his seat. Can you believe it? There are still good people out there." "Yes, there are." She closes her eyes for a moment, still holding the patient's hand. She feels the cold skin begin to yield a little to the warmth of her hands. She opens her eyes again, attentive. "You know, Mrs. X, there are days when you want to give up. I'm not going to lie to you. You get tired. But then I come in here, and you remind me that life is stubborn. You are stubborn, and so am I. With your other hand, check the tube to see if there is any redness. Everything is clean, everything is in place. Adjust the bed 2 fingers higher. There, that's better for you to breathe. We find the most comfortable position, even if it's millimeter by millimeter." The room grows even quieter. Outside, a cart passes by, making a long noise. The sound fades away. The silence returns, heavy but tender. Louisa feels sleep coming, but she doesn't give in. She knows that the early morning calls for patience and presence. "I'm going to stay here for a little while." "Okay," she says, pulling up a chair and sitting down next to her, "just listening to these beeps with you." She rests her elbow on the bed, her face close to the patient's hand. The light from the lamp casts a soft shadow on her motionless face. The moon tattoo seems to glow a little, just an illusion, a small detail that became a sign of life in that silent body. "Who are you? Huh?" It escapes him like a sigh. "Who is waiting for you? Who gave you that moon?" She keeps what he was going to say next to himself. She knows that questions like these cannot be answered in the early hours of the morning or in a hurry. She takes a deep breath and replaces his curiosity with care. She checks the monitor's rhythm again. The drip of the IV, the color of her skin. Everything stable, everything the same, everything somehow sacred. "I'm going to do my rounds, and I'll be right back." He lets her know by getting up slowly without letting go of her hand suddenly. First his fingers, then his palm. "I won't be long, I promise." Before leaving, he turns off the spotlight and leaves only the low lamp near the floor on. He walks to the door and stops in the doorway. She looks back again, takes 2 steps back, adjusts the blanket at the foot of the bed that had come loose. "I almost left you cold," she murmurs with a sad smile. "Don't even think about it." Then she straightens up, picks up the clipboard, puts on antibacterial gel again, and leaves. The hallway envelops her with its church-like silence. The hospital breathes along with the machines. And in the middle of the night, with the rain outside and the world asleep, a nurse continues step by step, caring for a nameless woman. A woman who even in silence fills that room with questions and the desire to stay. Because sometimes what saves us on a dawn like this is the simple act of staying and staying close. Later she returns. The sound of the early morning is always the same. The continuous VIP of the machines, the air conditioning blowing cold air, and the slow drip of the IV. Louisa adjusts her glasses, leans over the equipment, and calmly checks each number. She takes a deep breath, picks up the clipboard, and writes down the vital signs. Everything is normal. Everything is the same, just like every other night. With a steady hand, she adjusts the respirator hose that had bent slightly. The noise changes. The air flows more smoothly again. She lets out a quiet, yes, happy to have fixed it, takes the syringe, carefully applies the medication to the IV, and then readjusts the cables that go to the patient's chest. It is at that moment that she takes a step back, bumps into the chair, and almost drops the clipboard. Her breath catches. Her face flushes and her eyes fill with tears. It can't be. She stammers, her hands in the air, not knowing whether to grab her face or her chest. For a moment, everything stops. The VIP of the machine, the cold air, the clock marking the dead hour of the night. Nothing matters. Only that word spoken by lips that should not move, approaching again, trembling as if it were about to touch fire with its fingertips. She brings her ear close to the patient's mouth. She waits for seconds that seem like an eternity. Nothing. Silence engulfs the room again. "You said my name." The technician shrugs and leaves, closing the door slowly. Silence returns. Louisa approaches the bed again. She takes the patient's cold hand without blinking, as if expecting to hear the impossible again. "If it was real," she murmurs, her voice trembling, holding back tears. "Then tell me again, please." Nothing, just the VIP of the machine, just the icy breath of the air conditioning. But her heart is no longer the same. The early morning now has a new weight, and that room, for the first time in 5 years, seems to hold a living secret. Louisa spent the rest of the night restless. The shift seemed longer than all the others. Her heart still felt the weight of that whisper. She tried to convince herself that she was tired, that it had all been an illusion, but she couldn't. In the middle of the night, after checking on the other patients, she quietly returned to the door of Mrs. X's room. She didn't go in. She stood in the hallway, leaning against the cold wall, her arms crossed, looking through the crack in the glass. The clock read almost 3 a.m. The hospital was asleep. Only the machines were still running. The monitor continued its monotonous rhythm, but her eyes were not on the device. They were on the patient's motionless face. In that heavy silence, Louisa's mind began to play tricks on her. Perhaps it was fatigue. Perhaps it was hope. But suddenly she swore she saw something. The patient's eyelids, an almost invisible movement, as if her eyes were trying to open for a second. Louisa opened hers, almost letting out a scream. She approached the glass, her hands pressed against her chest, the air stuck in her throat. "No, it can't be," she whispered, trembling. She ran into the room, stood next to the bed, leaned over the patient's face, her eyes fixed, waiting for seconds that seemed like an eternity. The eyelids remained still again. Nothing else moved. Her heart was beating so hard that it seemed to shake her clothes. She was breathing fast, uncontrollably. She held on to the edge of the bed to keep from falling. "I saw it. I swear I saw it," she said softly, as if talking to her own fear. Unable to bear the doubt alone, she called the doctor on call, a tired man in a wrinkled gown. He entered the room, rubbing his eyes. "What happened now, Louisa?" he asked, half annoyed by the sleepiness. "Doctor, I saw her eyes move." Her voice came out broken, almost like a little girl's. He sighed, walked over to the bed and checked the monitor. He looked at the patient's face and carefully lifted her eyelid. "No reflex," he said dryly, putting his pen in his pocket. "Sometimes there are involuntary movements." "No, doctor, it wasn't a reflex. I was watching. It was different." It was as if she was trying to open them. He interrupted her with a tone that sounded like a sentence. "Louisa, 5 years in a coma, it was just a reflex." She looked down, not wanting to argue anymore. The doctor left the room, closing the door slowly, and returned to his bitter early morning coffee. Louisa stayed there alone, her heart heavy. She sat down on the chair next to the bed, rested her elbow on the mattress, and looked at the patient's peaceful face. She slowly ran her hand through her dark hair, tucking a strand behind her ear. "What if it wasn't a reflex?" she asked softly, as if talking to the void. The tears came without asking permission. They were not tears of despair, but of a hope that was slowly growing, even though it made no sense. Her chest hurt, but it also felt warmer. "I'm here." "Yes," she whispered gently, squeezing the patient's hand. "If you want to open your eyes, I'll be here, don't be afraid." The room returned to total silence. The monitor continued its rhythm. No eyelids moved, but something had changed inside Louisa, as if a small flame had been lit. A flame that would no longer be extinguished. And that morning, even though she had no proof, Louisa left the room with the certainty that she was not alone in that vigil. Something inside her said, she's trying to come back. That early morning would not leave Louisa's mind. The patient's motionless face, the almost movement in her eyes, the impossible whisper. Everything followed her, even outside the room. A strange feeling grew in her heart, as if that woman, until now known only as Mrs. X, was not just another patient. There was something else, something no one wanted to see. In the dining room during a short break, Louisa stared at the cup of cold coffee in front of her. Her colleagues talked about unimportant things, laughing softly, but she heard nothing. Her gaze was lost, fixed on nothing, until she sighed deeply and murmured to herself, "Who are you? Who is waiting for you?" That question kept ringing in her head until her shift ended. When the sun began to rise behind the mountains, illuminating the hospital courtyard, Louisa made a decision. She could no longer treat that woman as a number, as an occupied bed. She had to know who she was. The next day, her heart racing, she went to the hospital administration office. She knocked on the door of the archive room, where an elderly woman with glasses perched on the tip of her nose was organizing papers in dusty boxes. "Good morning, Donna Teresa," Louisa said, trying to sound normal. "I need your help." The woman looked up wearily and raised an eyebrow. "Help with what, dear?" "It's about the unidentified patient in room 12 of the intensive care unit." Louisa hesitated but continued, "I want to see her things." Donna Teresa adjusted her glasses and snorted. "Look, it's been years. No one ever came. She has no family. She has nothing. What's left of her is stored in the warehouse, and it's just junk. Please, Donna Teresa." Louisa's voice broke, almost pleading. "I need to see." The woman looked at her silently for a few seconds, then sighed, got up slowly, grabbed a huge bunch of keys, and nodded. "Come with me then, but don't say I let you. Eh?" The basement hallway was narrow, smelled musty, and had boxes stacked up to the ceiling. The dim light from the bulb flickered as if it were about to go out at any moment. Donna Teresa walked ahead, muttering, "These things stay here because no one comes for them. They're just painful memories." They stopped in front of a high shelf where a cardboard box was covered in thick dust. Donna Teresa pulled it out and placed it on the table. She shook her hands to remove the dust. "Here it is. That's it." Louisa felt a chill when she saw that simple box. It was all that remained of the story of someone who was still breathing back at intensive care unit. With trembling hands, she opened it slowly. There was little inside. Clothes folded haphazardly, a torn leather jacket, some worn sneakers. Nothing that said who he was. Louisa checked each item, smelling the mixture of gasoline and dust. At the bottom of the box, she found a small blue backpack with a stuck zipper. She tried to open it, and after struggling a bit, she succeeded. Her heart was beating faster, but the backpack also seemed almost empty. A broken plastic comb, a dried-up lipstick, a handkerchief stained with old blood, no documents, no name, nothing that answered the questions tormenting Louisa. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing deeply with the handkerchief in her hands. A deep sadness overwhelmed her. How was it possible for someone to be alive and at the same time not exist in the world? Donna Teresa, already impatient, crossed her arms. "See, I told you there's nothing there." "Forget it, Louisa. That woman is already lost." Louisa lifted her face, tears welling up in her eyes. "No one is lost," she replied firmly, carefully returning each item to the box as if they were valuable. "If she is breathing, it is because her story is not yet over." Donna Teresa looked at her with a mixture of surprise and pity, then turned and left, muttering, Louisa was left alone in the storeroom, hugging the little backpack to her chest. In the midst of that silence, covered by the smell of dampness, she made a promise in her mind. I'm going to find out who you are, even if I'm the only one who wants to know. The blue backpack, already worn, dirty, with a rusty zipper. She ran her hand over it as if caressing something alive. Her heart was beating fast, her breath was short. It took her a moment to find the courage to open it. Come on, she whispered to herself. With effort, she managed to open the zipper. Inside were some crumpled clothes that smelled of gasoline and old rain. A stained white t-shirt, pants torn at the knees, normal things. But at the bottom, almost hidden, a piece of paper folded in four. Louisa took it out slowly, afraid of tearing it. It was a short letter written in shaky handwriting, as if the hand that wrote it was tired or in a hurry. She opened it carefully, and the short sentence hit her like a stone in the chest. Sorry for not coming. She couldn't breathe. Her eyes burned. Sorry for not coming, she repeated softly, feeling her throat close up. My God, she pressed the paper against her chest like someone pressing a wound. That sentence seemed to contain enormous pain. Greater than time, greater than any explanation. Who wrote it? Where was it going? Who was it asking for forgiveness? The tears flowed without her being able to stop them. She stood there crying softly in the middle of the storage room, feeling that the loneliness of that patient now had a hidden voice, a voice asking for forgiveness. She took a deep breath, trying to calm down, and looked inside the backpack again. Among the dirty clothes, there was also a crumpled photo. She picked it up with trembling hands and opened it carefully. The author image was faded, but it was clear. A dark-haired woman was hugging a little girl of about 6 years old with a big, innocent smile. They both looked happy, as if the whole world was contained in that embrace. Louisa ran her finger over the girl's face, as if she wanted to feel the life that had been there. Her heart beat fast with a mixture of sadness and tenderness. She turned the photo over, and on the back was a phrase written with love. My little star Luna, I love you. The nurse closed her eyes, feeling the lump in her throat tighten. Luna, she whispered, her voice breaking, so you weren't nobody. You had someone. You were someone's world. She placed the photo on her chest along with the letter. Tears fell on the paper, blurring the old ink a little. It was as if at that moment the motionless patient in the intensive care unit was no longer just a nameless body. She had a story. She had love. She had a secret hidden at the bottom of a forgotten backpack. Louisa took a deep breath, trying to calm herself, but something inside her had changed. It wasn't just curiosity, it was a calling. A silent plea she could no longer ignore. Louisa left the storage room with the backpack pressed against her chest, as if she were carrying something sacred. Her heart was still heavy from what she had found. The letter, the photo, those words that seemed to be filled with tears. From then on, the patient was no longer just Mrs. X. She was no longer just a body lying there, forgotten, connected to cables and machines. That same night, when she entered the room, something inside her wouldn't allow her to call her anything else. She stood in front of the bed, looked at the motionless face, and took a deep breath. Good evening, Luna, she said softly, almost in a whisper, as if introducing herself to an old friend. It was strange at first, but it also brought her peace, because now when she adjusted the pillow, when she checked the IV, when she moisturized her dry lips, she felt that she was no longer talking to emptiness. She was talking to someone. Louisa began to talk more. She recounted little things about her day, as if they were together in a kitchen drinking coffee. Today, a patient told me, my daughter was laughing to herself. I said, if I were your daughter, you would have grounded me. She talked about the rain, the truck that arrived late, the neighbor who complained about the loud TV, and when the silence hurt too much, she would just hold Luna's cold hand. I squeezed it lovingly, as if to say, I'm here, you can rest. I paid more attention to details than ever before. When I combed her hair, I did it calmly, removing each knot as if I were caring for a living child. When I put cream on her hands, I massaged her fingers slowly, as if warming a child on a cold day. When she adjusted the sheet, she smoothed it until there was not a single wrinkle left. And every time she looked at the tattoo on her shoulder, the little moon drawn there, she felt it was a calling. "You are my moon now," he would say, his voice trembling, "and I will take care of you, as if you were already part of my family." Sometimes at night she would just sit next to her, looking at her face, the way her skin still had color, as if life had not given up on her. She would close her eyes and imagine the patient laughing, talking, calling someone by name. In those moments, Louisa found herself smiling to herself. And when sadness came, brought on by the weight of silence, she would speak to her sincerely. "Look, I don't know who you are, I don't know your story or what brought you here, but I do know one thing. You will not be forgotten. Not while I am here." The days passed and that room changed. It was no longer the bed of a nameless patient. It was the space of a woman named Luna. A woman who had a daughter in a photo, who had undelivered letters, who had a moon marked on her skin, and now also had someone who called her by name, even if it was borrowed. And every time Louisa walked in there, she felt her heart beat differently, as if she was slowly getting to know a friend who only knew how to listen, but who, even in silence, gave her something very important. The certainty that caring is indeed worthwhile. In that cold hospital, amid machines and beeps, a silent tenderness was born. The nurse, who had previously seen only a patient, now cared for someone who, although she did not move, already occupied a huge place within her, someone who, without saying anything, already made her feel less alone. But that night, something felt different. Louisa was walking down the intensive care unit corridor with the board against her chest when she suddenly stopped. There, right in front of her, was a little girl. She shouldn't have been there. It wasn't normal for girls to be walking around there in the early hours of the morning, let alone alone. The girl had long, straight hair that reached her waist. She was wearing a simple blue dress that moved slightly as if there were wind, but the air in the hallway was still. She was barefoot. Her gaze was sweet, almost calm, fixed on Louisa. Louisa froze. Her heart was beating fast and she had trouble breathing. "Hello, sweetie," she said slowly, trying to smile, even though her voice was trembling. "What are you doing here?" The girl didn't answer. She just smiled, a small, delicate smile, as if she were keeping a secret. She raised her hand and pointed to the room of the Comiomausa patient, the crescent moon room. Louisa swallowed, looked at the door of the room, and then looked back at the girl. "Do you know her?" she asked, not understanding. The girl just kept smiling, her eyes shining. Then Louisa took 2 steps forward, reaching out her hand. "Come, let me take you to your mom. You can't be alone in this hallway." But a blink of an eye was enough. A second of distraction. The girl was gone. The hallway was empty again. Only the cold white lights illuminated the overly clean floor. "Hey," Louisa spoke to herself, turning her body, looking from side to side. "Girl, where are you?" My God, her heart was beating very fast. It didn't make sense. She was sure of what she had seen. The blue dress, the eyes, the finger pointing at the room. It couldn't have been her imagination. She walked quickly to the end of the hallway. She looked to the sides. Nothing. No open doors. No sign of a girl. At that moment, she saw Donna Marta, the cleaning lady who was scrubbing the floor near the entrance. "Donna Marta," she called, still agitated. "I saw a little girl walk by here. Long hair, blue dress." The woman looked up, resting her hands on the mop handle. She frowned, confused. "Miss, not right now, Louisa. No one has passed by, but I saw her," Louisa insisted, her voice breaking. "She was right here in the middle of the hallway." She even pointed to the room. Donna Marta shook her head, a little frightened by the nurse's intensity. "Look, I've been here for over half an hour. If a little girl had passed by, I would have seen her. There's no way." Louisa stood still, not knowing what to say. Her hands were sweaty, her mouth dry, her heart pounding in her chest. How strange, she muttered, more to herself than to the cleaning lady. Very strange. She turned to look at Luna's door. She opened the hospital system, took a deep breath and spoke softly, as if asking for permission. Come on, help me. She typed in the bed number, the date of admission, the harsh word, no identification. The screen showed the same thing as always. Adult woman, motorcycle accident, no documents, no contact, nothing more than she already knew, nothing that clicked. Donna Teresa called out, looking over the monitor. The lady in the archive looked up, her glasses crooked on the tip of her nose. What's wrong, girl? I need to see the old admission books, the ones in the metal cabinet. Donna Teresa grimaced, but grabbed the keyring. The cabinet opened with a bang. She took out a thick, dirty notebook with yellowed pages and stains from age. Here you go. Don't break this, okay? It's the only good thing around here. Louisa turned the pages one by one, her pen trembling in her fingers. She looked for the date and found it. There it was. Female, no documents, multiple trauma, rescued on the highway, heavy rain, quick signatures, crooked stamp, everything cold, everything hard. But it was a start. Good, she murmured, writing down the time of admission on a small piece of paper. Now I have to cross this off. Cross with what? Teresa grumbled, with people who disappeared that same day. If someone reported that someone didn't come back, Teresa sighed wearily. That's the police's job, right? But anyway, just go ahead. Don't make things up. Louisa thanked her and went to the social work office. She turned on the computer and opened the missing persons registry page. The connection was slow, the loading bar moving at a snail's pace. She tapped her fingers impatiently, her heart in her throat. Come on. Come on. Come on. When the page opened, she entered the date range, the day of the accident, and the 2 days following it. She selected the region and clicked on search. The list appeared, names that hurt just to read. An elderly man who never came home. A young man who went out on his bike. A girl with a red backpack. Louisa read to the end with a lump in her throat until she stopped at a single name of an adult woman on the night of the accident. She read slowly so as not to make a mistake. Sariah Herrera, 38 years old. Louisa's hand grew cold, her stomach dropped. She leaned back in her chair, needing air. For a moment, everything was silent, as if the entire hospital were holding its breath with her. Sariah, she said, almost without a voice. Sariah, Herrera printed on the screen. The paper came out hot, trembling in the machine. She held it as if it were glass. There were few details. Age, date, approximate location, but the date was the same day, the same rainy night. Donna Teresa walked by the door and saw her pale face. What have you done now? Look, Louisa showed her the paper. Look, there's a woman who disappeared on the same day as the accident. Just this name. Look, Sariah Herrera, 38 years old. Teresa took the paper, brought it close to her eyes, looked at it for 2 seconds, and gave it back to her. It could be a coincidence, Louisa. Don't get hung up on it. It's going to hurt you. Coincidence? She repeated as if the word tasted bad. Maybe, but what if not? Teresa shrugged. I know you have a soft heart. Just be careful. Louisa nodded without taking her eyes off the name and wrote it down in a small pocket notebook in round handwriting. Sariah Herrera, 38, same date. She closed the notebook like someone keeping a secret. It wasn't proof yet. It wasn't certain, but it was the first clue she had. A name, a face of someone invisible, but with an age, a date, an absence that hurt. It was like finding a very thin thread in the darkness. She got up, thanked them sincerely, and walked back through the corridors. The hospital was beginning to wake up with the sounds of carts and soft voices. Louisa pressed the paper against her chest as if she were carrying an old photo. She stopped at the door of the room. She didn't go in yet. She stood outside looking through the glass. The monitor remained steady, the sheet in place, the face serene. Louisa rested her forehead on the cold glass, closed her eyes for a second, and let a tear escape. "I don't know if it's you," she whispered without anyone hearing, "but I found a name, and I'm going to see this through to the end." She finally entered slowly, adjusted the light, checked the IV, raised the pillow a little higher. The same gesture as always, the same care as always, only now with slightly warmer hands. She leaned close to the patient's ear as if telling a secret that only two people in the world could know. "Sariah," she said softly, testing how the name sounded in the air. "If that name is yours, I swear I won't let it be lost." Silence. No response, no movement, just the constant VIP and the cold air caressing the room. Then Louisa adjusted the blanket again. She made a short note in her pocket, nothing in the file, just for herself, and took 2 steps back, breathing calmly. She didn't run. She didn't rush. She kept the name lovingly, like someone protecting a small flame in a glass, and left the room with her heart on fire. Because in the midst of so much absence, a name had appeared, and names are sometimes the first door that opens. Louisa couldn't sleep well after that discovery. The name Sariah Herrera spun around in her head like a bell that wouldn't stop ringing. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the patient lying motionless in bed, and those letters written on the paper next to her. Sia, 38 years old, disappeared on the same day as the accident. It was more than a coincidence. It was an open door. The next day, she took advantage of a break in her shift to sit down at the old computer in the administrative office. Her hands were sweaty, but she typed firmly. Sariah Herrera, public records address. The connection was slow, loading with pauses. Louisa bit her lip impatiently until an old address appeared far from downtown on an almost forgotten street on the edge of Chicago. She wrote it down on a piece of paper, put it in her coat pocket, but didn't tell anyone. That wasn't part of her job. Everyone knew that, but her heart wouldn't let her let it go. On Sunday, her only day off, she put on a pair of simple pants, tied her hair back, and took a bus that dropped her off almost at the end of the line. From there, she walked. The old neighborhood seemed frozen in time. Old houses, walls with peeling paint, skinny dogs sleeping in the sun. The smell of wet earth still lingered from the previous night's rain. Her heart beat faster at every corner. What if it's nothing? What if I'm wrong, she thought. But she kept going until finally the street appeared in front of her, narrow with few houses. The number she had written down was there, almost hidden behind a crooked iron gate. She stopped. She spent a few seconds just looking. The house was in ruins, the windows broken, the roof full of holes, the paint worn down to the brick. The wooden door was closed with a rusty chain. The grass grew halfway up the wall. Louisa felt a tight knot in her chest. It was like standing in front of a grave. This place had been someone's home, but now there was only silence and abandonment. She approached slowly. She put her hand on the cold gate. "This is it," she whispered as if someone could hear her. The wind blew hard, causing a loose window to rattle. The sound echoed throughout the alley, and Louisa shivered. For a moment she thought about leaving, going home, but she couldn't. She had to take a closer look. She pushed the gate carefully, and it opened with a sharp squeak. She walked across the yard, which was littered with dry leaves and broken bottles. She stopped in front of the closed door. She tried to move the chain, but it was firmly in place. She stood there looking through a crack in the wood. Inside there was only darkness, a void that seemed to swallow everything. As she wondered whether to persist, she heard a soft voice behind her. An elderly woman with a headscarf was watching her from the other side of the fence. "Are you looking for someone?" she asked in a hoarse voice. Lua turned around quickly, startled. "Oh, sorry, I'm just checking. This house belonged to a woman named Sariah Herrera." The woman nodded slowly, squinting to see better. Yes, it did. She lived here with her husband and their little girl. But one day they disappeared. The house was left like this, abandoned. No one ever came back. The words cut Louisa like knives. She took a deep breath, trying to hide what she was feeling. "The little girl. Do you remember her name?" The woman looked up as if searching her memory. Luna. I think her name was Luna, a sweet little girl. She was always running around the yard. Louisa put her hand to her mouth, her eyes filled with tears. The photo, the letter, the tattoo, it all made sense. She felt her body go cold, her heart race. She had to lean on the chain to keep from falling. And them, what happened to them? The lady closed her eyes, sighing deeply. One day everything went silent. No one came back. The house was left like that, alone. Only the echo of her and the little girl remained. The wind blew strongly at that moment, hitting a loose window with a sharp noise. Louisa shivered from head to toe. She felt the tears wanting to come out, but she held them back, looking at that ruined facade as if she could hear the life that once existed there. The lady rested her chin on her cane and murmured, "Car, it's sad chit when a house becomes just a memory. Even sadder when the memory is of a little girl who no longer runs around the yard." Louisa closed her eyes for a moment, trying not to cry. The confirmation was there. The girl existed. Luna existed, and the silence of that house now weighed on her like a stuck scream. The elderly neighbor, her eyes full of memories, took an old key out of her apron pocket. She handed it to Louisa with a trembling hand. "I kept it. I don't know why. Maybe hoping someone would come back, but no one did. You can go in, dear." Louisa took the key carefully, almost as if it were something sacred. She thanked her with a silent gesture and pushed open the iron gate. The creak could be heard throughout the narrow street. Her heart was pounding. The chain on the front door came off with defensive care, unutility. The wood gave way, releasing a dense air of humidity, dust, and silence. The room was covered with old sheets, a broken armchair, a table with a cup still in the corner, as if someone had gotten up quickly and never returned. Louisa walked slowly, breathing deeply so as not to get lost in the weight of it all. She climbed the narrow staircase, one step at a time, listening to each creak as if it were a lament, until at the end of the hallway she found a door painted with stickers of stars and moons. Her chest felt tight. She already knew. The key trembled in her hand. She turned it carefully and pushed the door open. The girl's room was intact. A small world frozen in time, the bed with a pink comforter. Dolls lined up on the shelf but covered in dust. A small wooden table with colored pencils scattered around, some broken in half. The sweet smell of old paper mixed with dust filled her eyes with tears. In one corner of the bed was a colorful notebook with drawings on the cover. Louisa picked it up with trembling hands. It was a child's diary. She opened it to the first page. The letters were large and crooked, but full of life. "Today, Mum promised to take me to the circus." She put her hand to her mouth to stifle a sob. She turned the pages slowly. Short sentences, simple drawings of hearts, stars, a woman holding hands with a little girl. In each line, the voice of a little girl seemed to come to life inside, laughing, dreaming, waiting. But then, in the middle of the entries, the diary stopped abruptly. The last page had only one drawing, 3 people holding hands drawn under grey rain. The ink smudged, as if it had been done in a hurry. Louisa closed her eyes and tears fell without her being able to stop them. "They were going to the circus," she whispered with a broken voice, but they never made it. She sat on the edge of the bed, hugging the diary to her chest, feeling the weight of that absence. It was as if the girl's laughter still echoed in that room, as if at any moment she would come running in, asking to be picked up. Next to the small table, she noticed a little blue metal box with stickers that had already come off. She opened it slowly. Inside were small treasures carefully stored away. A butterfly-shaped brooch, a colorful plastic bracelet, and a crumpled photo. In the photo were Sariah, the moon girl, and a young man with a thin beard, all smiling in a sunny park. The happiness was so vivid that it seemed impossible to believe that this image was now in the past. Louisa ran her finger over their faces, crying softly. "You had everything. You had love. You had laughter. You had a future." The room was quiet, but the pain throbbed as if it were happening now. Every toy, every mark on the floor, every page of the diary screamed an absence that no one wanted to hear. And there, surrounded by dusty memories, Louisa understood that this story was no longer just the patient's. It was also hers, because now there was no way to go back. The hospital was full of quick footsteps, the noise of carts and muffled voices mingling in the hallway. Louisa, with the crumpled photo in her hands, felt her heart beating faster with every step toward the reception desk. The paper already had her fingerprints on it, as if she had clutched it in fear of losing the only connection she had found. She stood in front of the counter, took a deep breath, and handed the photo to the employees. You have seen these people." Her voice came out lower than she wanted. The women looked at each other. One of them, a young woman, took the photo, frowned, and returned it with a shrug. "No, I've never seen them." Another middle-aged woman also looked at the photo, biting her lip. "They don't ring a bell." Louisa's heart sank with each response. She clutched the paper tightly, almost giving up, until an older employee with grey hair pulled back in a bun approached slowly. She was drying her hands with a cotton cloth, and her tired eyes focused intently on the image. The silence lasted a few seconds. Then the woman sighed deeply. "That man. I remember him." Louisa looked up suddenly, as if she had heard a miracle. "You remember him? Are you sure?" The employee nodded slowly. "Yes, he came here every month, almost always on the same day. He arrived early, sat there in the reception area, pointed to one of the chairs against the wall, and remained silent, staring at the floor." Louisa approached, feeling an urgency in her chest, and then he came to visit someone. The woman shook her head. "No, he never went in to see any patients. He would stay there for a while and cry softly, but quietly, you know. He never asked for anything. Then he would get up and leave." The words fell on Louisa like stones. She looked again at the photo of the man in the photo, smiling next to Sariah and the little girl. "Do you know his name?" she asked, her voice trembling as if she feared the answer. The employee looked up at the ceiling, searching her memory, and then spoke firmly. "Carlos." His name was Carlos. A chill ran through Louisa. Her heart felt too small for what she was feeling. She remained silent for a few seconds, staring at the empty chair where he used to sit. She could almost see him there, shoulders slumped, head bowed, fighting back tears that no one else could see. The employee sighed again. He was a good man, you could tell, but he carried a great sadness. "I never dared to ask him why." Louisa closed her eyes and swallowed hard. Carlos repeated softly, as if testing the weight of that name. The older woman put her hand on her arm. "If you found that photo, maybe it's time for someone to look for him too." Louisa just nodded, tears falling discreetly. The photo now seemed more alive, as if it were crying out for answers. That man's frozen smile was no longer just an image. It had a name. It had pain. It had a story she needed to hear. And looking at the empty chair in the reception area, Louisa felt her heart tighten because she could imagine the silence of that man sitting there month after month, crying alone for a woman who never woke up. It took Louisa days to find Carlos's address. She asked colleagues, discreetly questioned people at the reception desk, and made silent phone calls. When the place finally appeared in front of her, she almost backed away. It was a simple house, but it had a heavy feel to it, with closed curtains, a poorly painted gate, and dry plants. She took a deep breath and knocked. The sound echoed hollowly, as if the knock were an invasion. It took a while for the door to open slowly. A thin man with a grown beard and a deep gaze looked older than he really was. His body was hunched over, as if he were carrying an invisible suitcase full of stones. "Is that you, Carlos?" Louisa asked in a low voice, trying not to scare him. He frowned suspiciously. "Who are you?" Louisa took a deep breath, clutching the photo to her chest. She slowly held it out. "I'm a nurse at St. Hope Hospital, and I think this photo is yours." Carlos took it with trembling hands, looked at it, and in that moment, his body collapsed, his knees buckled, his breathing faltered. My God, he murmured, pressing the photo against his face. It's her. It's my Sarah and my little girl. Tears began to fall uncontrollably. He sat down in the doorway as if he didn't have the strength to stand. Louisa approached, feeling her eyes well up as well. So is it true? Is she the one in the hospital? Carlos cried silently, like someone who finally couldn't take it anymore. Then he looked up, his eyes red, and asked in a broken voice, "She doesn't know. Doesn't she remember what she did? Has she woken up yet?" Louisa was confused. What? What did she do? He took a deep breath, resting his head in his hands. He remained trapped in his own pain for a few seconds before speaking. That night began with a trembling voice. We argued. I said stupid things. She went out with Luna on the motorcycle. It was raining heavily. He closed his eyes, his face full of pain. The motorcycle skidded. Luna died instantly. My little girl. The words came out like a sob, and he covered his face, crying loudly. Now my 6-year-old girl will never open her eyes again. Louisa put her hand to her mouth, feeling the ground slip away from under her. And in that moment, the silence was louder than any words, because they both knew that the pain of that night had never ended. And maybe just now it was really starting to be told. He invited her in to show her what he had found and to learn more about her. He accepted. Carlos was sitting at the kitchen table, his eyes still red from crying. His hands trembled when Louisa placed the backpack she had kept from the hospital on the old wood. This was with her on the day of the accident, Louisa said in a low voice. Maybe you should see. He looked at her fearfully, like someone looking at an open wound. Still, he slowly pulled the backpack toward him, opened the scratchy zipper, and began to look through what was inside. Dirty clothes, broken lipstick, a stained handkerchief, until he found the folded piece of paper crumpled by time. His fingers stopped. Silence filled the kitchen. He recognized it instantly. I know what this is, he murmured, his voice catching. He opened the letter carefully, as if afraid of tearing it. The shaky handwriting jumped out at him. There wasn't much written, but each word seemed to weigh heavily. He read in a low voice, almost breathless. Sorry for not coming. The man closed his eyes tightly, pressing the paper against his forehead. I know this letter, he said, crying. I wrote it. Louisa opened her eyes in surprise. You? I wrote that letter to my daughter, Carlos Soyosaba. It was a scary night. I always thought something might happen to me, so I wrote it. If something happens to me, read this to her. I asked Sarah to keep it. I asked her to give it to her if it was ever necessary. I was shaking from head to toe. I could hardly speak, but I never made it. I never got to give it to Luna. Never. The word broke into loud, choked sobs. He hit the table weakly with his hand and then let the letter fall from his fingers. It was just a piece of paper, but it was all I had to say to her, and it stayed in the backpack, forgotten, stuck there with her mother. Louisa's eyes burned with tears. Carlos, no one could have imagined what was going to happen. But I should have been there, he cried, his voice breaking. I should have gone through with it. Put that letter in my daughter's hands, but I didn't. I hid. I kept quiet, and now he dropped his head into his arms. Now she would never know. His crying filled the kitchen. It wasn't just sadness, it was guilt. Guilt mixed with love, with anger at himself, with the pain of not being able to turn back time. Louisa approached slowly and put her hand on his shoulder. Carlos Luna did know. He didn't need the letter. All children feel when they are loved. He raised his face, his eyes red, his chest heaving. But Sariah knew too. And yet she went out that night. She took Luna out into the rain. Her voice broke. The words hung in the air. 2 guilty parties, each trapped in their silence, separated by a tragedy that neither could face. Carlos took the letter again with a trembling hand and hugged it to his chest. This letter should have been light, but it became shadow. It became a burden. Louisa discreetly wiped away her tears. Maybe it can still be light. He looked at her without understanding, his eyes full of pain, but for the first time with a tiny spark, and at that moment the kitchen seemed too small for so much crying, so much regret. The letter, dirty and crumpled, was no longer just paper. It was the memory of everything that was left unsaid, of everything that remained stuck in a father's throat. It was an open wound that needed to be healed somehow. The room was as silent as ever. All that could be heard was the sound of the monitor, the IV dripping, the cold air. Louisa adjusted the chair next to the bed, tired after many hours of work, but not wanting to leave. The notebook was on her lap, but she wasn't writing anything. What she was really doing was talking. She spoke as if someone could answer her. You know, Luna loved the park. She began in a soft voice, almost like a song. The neighbor told me that you always went there. She ran so much that she came back with her feet all dirty with dirt. Louisa smiled to herself, looking at Sariah's motionless face. I bet you got angry, right? She laughed softly, but deep down you loved to see her smile. The room seemed to listen. It was as if every word remained floating in the air above that bed. And once she wrote in her diary that you promised to take her to the circus. Louisa's voice broke. She drew you two holding hands, a happy little girl. She took the patient's hand as she did every night. And that's when it happened. First, a tiny movement, almost nothing. But Louisa felt it, the fingers that hadn't moved in years, or a fragile touch, but real. She opened her eyes, her heart racing. My God, she whispered without letting go of her hand. You moved. She lowered her face, bringing her eyes close to hers, looking for any sign. The fingers moved again, lightly, as if responding to what she had just said. Yes, you heard me, didn't you? Tears were already running down her face. Did you hear what I said about Luna? She ran to get help. Nurses came in. Doctors checked her, but they all said the same thing. A reflex, an unintentional movement. Louisa wouldn't accept it. It wasn't a reflex, she said, her hand on her chest. I felt it. She responded to her daughter's story. The doctors looked at each other coldly, but they left her alone. For them, nothing had changed. For Louisa, everything had changed. That same night, she decided to call Carlos. His voice on the other end of the line sounded tired, sluggish. Carlos, come, please. You have to see with your own eyes. It took him a while to believe her, but the next day he arrived at the hospital. He walked down the hallway as if he were stepping on a field full of bombs, each step heavier than the last. When he reached the door of the room, he stopped. Her hands were sweaty, her eyes filled with tears before she entered. I don't know if I can, Louisa whispered. He held her arm firmly. Yes, you can. She needs you. They went in together. Carlos stood in front of the bed, looking at the motionless woman. Her chest rose and fell with the rhythm of the machine. She put her hand to her mouth, swallowing her tears. Sariah, she said, almost in a whisper. Louisa approached, pulled up a chair and sat down beside her. Yesterday, she moved her hand. When I told her about Luna, I want you to see it. She took Sariah's hand again, affectionately. Carlos knelt on the other side, touching her fingers carefully as if they were made of glass. Love, it's me. His voice trembled. Carlos, I'm here. Silence, only the constant beeping. He closed his eyes, letting the tears fall. But then, as if time had stopped, her fingers moved again. First a slight tremor, then an almost invisible squeeze. Carlos felt it, his whole body reacted. She moved, he shouted, his voice breaking, looking at Louisa. Did you see? She moved. Tears now streamed down his face like a river. He leaned over the bed, crying for the first time in years, but not out of despair, out of relief. My God, are you there? Are you still there? He repeated, holding her hand against his face. Louisa was also crying silently. The room, which had been cold before, was now filled with something that no device could measure, hope. And in that moment, after so many years, it seemed that Sariah's heart was beginning to respond to the call of the one who had never stopped waiting for her. The room was filled with a tense silence, the kind that makes even the air feel heavier. Louisa was sitting in the chair, quietly telling one of the stories from the children's diary. On the other side, Carlos was barely breathing, his eyes fixed on the woman he hadn't seen in so many years. Suddenly, something changed. Sarayah's body, which until then had not moved, made a small effort. Her eyelids trembled as if fighting against an invisible weight. Carlos leaned forward, unable to believe it. "She's trying to open her eyes," he said in a trembling voice, almost breathless. Louisa squeezed Sarayah's hand tightly. "That's right. With strength. You can do it. We're here." The seconds seemed like an eternity, until finally, slowly, her eyes opened, weak, heavy, but open, a pair of eyes that saw the light after years of darkness. Carlos brought his hands to his face, sobbing. "My God, Sariah, you're back." She blinked slowly, her gaze lost, confused. She was trying to understand what she was seeing. The white ceiling, the machines, Louisa's tired face, the man next to her with tears falling. She moved her dry lips and a fragile voice came out, almost a broken whisper. "Where is Luna?" The question hung in the air like a knife piercing the chest of everyone there. Carlos covered his mouth, his whole body collapsing. A choked sob escaped him. Louisa closed her eyes for a moment, trying not to cry. Her heart wanted to scream, but she knew she couldn't. She leaned over Sariah, stroking her hair. "Calm down," she said in a sweet voice. "Rest. You just woke up." But Sariah insisted in the same weak voice. "Where is my little girl?" Carlos couldn't take it anymore. He let go of her hand and rushed out of the room, his body shaking, tears falling uncontrollably. The sound of the door closing echoed like a lament. Louisa ran after him, caught up with him in the hallway and grabbed his arm tightly. "Carlos, look at me." He couldn't. He rested his forehead against the wall, his shoulders shaking silently. "I can't, Louisa," he murmured, his voice almost muffled. "How am I going to tell her that our daughter—" Louisa squeezed his hand firmly, even though her eyes were also filled with tears. "You don't have to do it now, she just came back, but someday she'll want to know." He closed his eyes tightly, letting the tears flow. "I can't do it," he said, his voice breaking. "I should have protected them both, and I lost them both." Louisa shook her head, moved. "You didn't lose Sariah. She's in there breathing, looking, feeling. You left once, Carlos. Don't leave again." He took a deep breath as if swallowing his own pain. He leaned his back against the wall, crying softly without strength. Louisa, her hand still on his arm, spoke slowly, as if telling a diff intensive care unit truth. "You're back now, but some things are going to hurt." He didn't answer, just closed his eyes, letting the tears fall freely after years of holding them back. The hallway, once empty, now seemed to carry the weight of a heart that was finally accepting its weakness. And there, between despair and hope, Carlos's silent crying sounded like the confession of a man who never stopped loving, but who still did not know how to bear the pain of the truth. The night was heavy, the hospital completely silent, the cold corridors holding stories that no one dared to tell. Carlos entered with determination, even though his heart was beating like a drum. Louisa found him in the middle of the intensive care unit, looking at Sarayah's door with a mixture of fear and courage. "Carlos, what are you thinking?" she asked, already guessing the answer. He took a deep breath, unable to hold back the tears that came before the words. "She has to know. She has to say goodbye to our daughter," his voice broke. "It's not fair for her to wake up and find only silence." Louisa was silent for a moment. She knew they didn't have permission. She knew it was risky, but she looked at Sariah, fragile in her bed, and understood. "Then let's go," she said firmly. "I'll help you carefully." They put Sariah in the wheelchair. She was still weak, her eyes full of confusion, but she didn't resist. She just let them take her, as if she knew something important was about to happen. The early morning protected them. They walked down the almost empty hallway, the shadows of the lamps flickering on the floor. The hospital gate opened with a slow creak, as if it too knew that this moment was unlike any other. The cart continued silently to the small cemetery on the outskirts of Chicago. The air smelled of wet earth, and the cold wind seemed to cut through the skin. Louisa pushed the chair slowly, and Carlos walked beside her, breathing deeply so as not to break down. They arrived in front of a simple, light-colored stone tomb. There were no fresh flowers, only a few wilted ones left, who knows when. The inscription, short and painful, glowed in the dim moonlight. Luna Herrera, 2016 to 2020. Time stood still. Sariah fixed her eyes on the tombstone, first in silence, as if she didn't understand. Then her mouth opened in a hoarse whisper. No, it can't be. She shook her head. Not her. Tears began to fall like a waterfall. Her body trembled, and a deep cry escaped from a place where there is only pain. My girl, no, not my girl. Her voice echoed in the empty cemetery, breaking the hearts of those who heard it. Carlos fell to his knees in front of the tombstone, pounding the cold ground with his hands, crying as he had never cried before. Forgive me, my love, he sobbed. Forgive me. Louisa, her hands trembling, took the letter found in the backpack and the small necklace with the name Luna engraved on it out of the bag. She placed them gently on the tombstone as if she were giving away a piece of her soul. Here it is, she whispered in a broken voice, all that was left of her. Sariah tried to get up from the chair, screaming desperately. No, it can't be true. I want to see her. I want my little girl. The force of the pain was greater than her weak body. The scream turned into a moan, and soon her eyes rolled back. She fainted in Carlos's arms, who held her desperately. Sariah, no, he shouted, shaking her body. Hold on, please. Louisa ran over and helped hold her. Her heart was beating fast. We have to go back now, she said firmly, with tears in her eyes. The car sped back along the dark road. The silence was broken only by Carlos's sobs as he held Sariah's hand, afraid to let go. When they arrived at the hospital, dawn was still breaking. The doctors rushed to attend to her, and Carlos stood at the door with his hands over his face, trembling. Louisa put her hand on his shoulder. There were no words. What had just happened was not just a visit to a grave. It was a belated farewell, torn away by the force of years of silence. And at that moment, both Carlos and Louisa understood. Sariah's pain was just beginning, and no one comes out of a farewell like that, unscathed. The room was filled with a strange calm after the storm in the cemetery. The sound of the machines was almost like a heart beating slowly. The nurses had already stabilized Sora, and Carlos, exhausted, was still sitting in a corner with his face hidden in his hands. Sora, still pale, was breathing with intensive care, unutility. Her eyes were open, but her voice was weak. She moved her lips, but no sound came out. She seemed to be fighting her own body to be able to speak. Louisa noticed, approached the bed, took her hand and said tenderly, "Wait, I'll be right back." She ran to the reception desk, grabbed a plain notebook and a blue pen. When she returned, she placed everything on the bed. "Here, Sariah, write as best you can." With effort, the woman took the pen. Her hand was shaking so much that she could hardly hold it. Louisa helped her carefully, guiding her fingers. The tip of the pen touched the paper, and little by little, very slowly, the first words came out. "She will forgive me." The sentence remained there, crooked, almost illegible, but clear enough to break any heart. Carlos looked up at that very moment, read the sentence, and covered his face with his hands, crying loudly, as if each letter were a stab in the heart. Louisa, her eyes filled with tears, moved closer, knelt beside the bed, and took Sariah's hand. "Listen to what I'm going to tell you," she said with a trembling but firm voice. "She never needed to forgive you because she never stopped loving you." Tears ran down Sariah's face. A silent sob shook her fragile body. She dropped the pen and brought her hand to her chest, as if trying to hold a heart that hurt too much. Carlos on the other side cried uncontrollably, "I should have told you that. I should have given you that certainty, he murmured, unable to get any closer. Sariah closed her eyes for a moment, and a single tear rolled down her cheek. There were no words, no strength, but her expression said it all. Pain, love, and a small, timid relief. Finally hearing that, Louisa held her hand more firmly, discreetly wiping her own tears with the other. You are not alone, Sarah. Neither before nor now. The room fell silent again, but it was not the same cold silence as before. It was a silence filled with tears, filled with hidden love, filled with things that were never said aloud, but now somehow were being engraved in the hearts of everyone there. And that night, for the first time in many years, the weight on Sia's chest began to change. It was still pain, but a pain that breathed hope, a silent rebirth. The morning sun streamed through the hospital windows, bringing a soft, almost shy light. After so many early mornings of pain, that light seemed like an invitation to breathe differently. Louisa slowly pushed the wheelchair where Sariah was sitting. Her body was still fragile, but her eyes were alive, though filled with tears. "Where are you taking me?" Sora asked in a hoarse but curious voice. Louisa smiled at the garden. "I want to show you something." Carlos walked silently beside them. He was carrying a small tree in a bag of soil. His tired face showed that he was still crying inside, but at that moment he seemed to have a purpose. The garden was behind the hospital. It wasn't big, but it had benches, some flowers, and birds singing as they came to perch. For those who spent their days between beds and machines, that patch of green was like a miracle. Louisa stopped the wheelchair near a patch of soil that was still empty. She looked at Sariah tenderly. "I thought this might be the right place." Sariah frowned, not understanding. Then Carlos placed the little tree in front of her, a small jacaranda with delicate, fragile leaves. "It's for Luna," he said, his voice trembling, "so she can continue to grow here with you." Sariah's eyes filled with tears. She brought her trembling hand to her face, trying not to cry, but she couldn't. "My little girl," she whispered, as if calling her daughter for the last time. Louisa bent down and dug a hole in the ground with her own hands, not caring that she was getting dirty. Then she guided Sariah's fragile fingers so that she could touch the earth herself, feel the life that was being born there. Carlos knelt beside her and helped put the little tree in place. The three of them stood in silence, covering it with soil little by little. It was a simple gesture, but heavy like a ritual. Each handful of soil seemed to carry tears, memories, guilt, and also love. When the little tree was firmly in place, Louisa took a small wooden plaque out of her pocket that she had made herself in a hurry. She nailed it to the side of the tree and read aloud in a broken voice, "Luna lives here." Sariah's heart broke. She cried openly. But this time there was something different. It wasn't just pain. It was also relief, as if her daughter was somehow still breathing in that garden. Carlos hugged the wheelchair from behind, resting his face on her hair. He cried silently with her, holding her tight as if afraid to let go. Louisa discreetly wiped her eyes, but let a tear fall. She looked at the little tree swaying in the wind and said softly, "Now she will never be forgotten." The wind blew strongly at that moment, causing the new leaves to move. Sariah looked up at the sky and with a trembling hand touched the fragile trunk of the tree. "Thank you," she said in a whisper. "Thank you for giving me back a little piece of her." The garden fell silent, but it was not a hospital silence. It was a silence full of life. It was as if there, in that small piece of land, the smiling girl named Luna had found a way to continue breathing through the roots. And on that day, amid tears and wind, not only was a tree born, but also the hope that true love never dies. It only finds new ways to blossom. The hospital garden was silent that afternoon. The wind gently moved the leaves of the newly planted tree, and the smell of wet earth was still in the air. Sariah sat in her wheelchair, her eyes fixed on the small wooden sign that read, "Luna lives here." Carlos sat on a nearby bench, staring at the ground with his elbows resting on his knees. For a long time, neither of them said anything. The silence between them was heavy, but different. It wasn't the silence of someone who wants to avoid the other. It was the silence of someone who has a lot to say and doesn't know where to start. It was Sarah who broke the barrier. Her voice was weak but firm. "You used to come to the hospital, right?" Carlos looked up in surprise. It took him a few seconds to answer, then he nodded slowly. "Yes. Every month. I would sit in the reception area, but I didn't have the courage to go in." She took a deep breath and a tear fell without permission. "I could feel it somehow, as if you were nearby." Carlos closed his eyes, trying to hold back the pain rising in his throat. "I wanted to, but I couldn't. Every time I thought about seeing you, the image of her came back. The moon lying on that road couldn't bear it." Sariah clutched the arms of the chair with trembling fingers. "I can't bear it either," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I went out that night. I insisted. I took her with me." And she left. Carlos shook his head, tears falling. "Don't say that. It's my fault too. I yelled. I said horrible things. If I had kept quiet, maybe you wouldn't have left." They both fell silent again, but now the silence was shared, not lonely. The weight was divided. Sariah turned her face toward him, her eyes tired, but full of truth. "Carlos, I don't have the strength to argue about blame. I only know that our daughter didn't deserve this." He got up from the bench, went over to her, and knelt down beside the chair. He took her hand slowly, as if asking for permission. No, she didn't deserve it, but she gave us, even if it was for a short time, the purest thing. Tears fell from both of them, silent, heavy. For a few minutes there were no apologies or reproaches, just their crying together, their hands clasped, their hearts open, the wind blowing strongly, moving the leaves of the little tree as if someone were touching them. Sariah looked up with her eyes full of tears and whispered, Maybe she's listening to us now." Carlos rested his forehead on her hand, crying softly, "If she is, I hope she sees that we are still here, surviving." They remained like that, embraced by the silence of the garden, while for the first time the pain did not separate them, but only united them. And in that moment they were no longer two broken people, but two survivors trying to learn how to live again. The room was lit by the soft morning light. Sia, still in the hospital bed, looked out the window as if searching for a piece of sky that could give her back what she had lost. The days had been very intensive care unit, but there was something in her gaze that was beginning to lift, even through her tears. Louisa entered slowly with something hidden under her arm. The nurse said nothing at first, just pulled up a chair and sat down beside her. She remained silent for a moment, breathing deeply, like someone who knows that what she has in her hands is not just an object. Sariah began in a calm voice. "I found this at your house. I thought it was only fair to give it back to you." She placed a worn, colourful notebook on her lap, its edges bent and stained by time. Sariah looked at it with surprise. When she ran her hand over the cover, she recognized it. Her whole body trembled. "It's hers," she whispered, unable to hold back the tears that were already falling. La just nodded, her eyes filled with tears. With trembling hands, Sariah opened the first page. The large, crooked letters of a little girl jumped out at her. "Today Mom promised to take me to the circus." She put her hand to her mouth, sobbing loudly. Every word written by her daughter was like hearing her voice. She turned more pages. Colourful drawings, scribbles of stars, crooked hearts, a little house with a chimney. Sometimes she smiled through her tears, like when she found a drawing of herself in a huge dress. She said, "I was a queen," she said, crying and laughing at the same time. At other times, she just closed the notebook against her chest, holding it tight as if she could hug her daughter through the paper. Carlos entered quietly, standing in the doorway watching. He didn't have the courage to speak, but he saw Sariah there, lost in her memories, and he also cried softly. For days the diary never left her hands. She spent hours reading it over and over again, as if it were medicine and also an open wound. Sometimes she smiled to herself, remembering the girl's mischief. Other times she just closed her eyes and let the tears flow. At night, when the hospital was quiet, Louisa passed by the room and found her still with the diary on her lap. Sariah caressed the cover as if it were skin. "She's here," she whispered without looking at anyone. "In every word, in every drawing, she's still here." Louisa approached her, took her hand and replied gently, "And she'll always be here whenever you open those pages." Sariah closed her eyes and for the first time in many years felt something other than pain. It was as if each of her daughter's innocent scribbles was a hug, a sign that somehow love did not end on that road. And in that hospital room, between tears and broken smiles, a little girl's diary became the greatest gift for a mother. The hallway of the pediatric ward had a different atmosphere. It wasn't the heavy silence of the intensive care unit, but it wasn't light either. It was a mixture of the sound of children coughing, the noise of toy carts pushed by nurses, and the quiet crying of a child afraid of needles. Sariah, still weak, pushed her wheelchair alone with trembling hands as she held on tightly to the rim. Louisa walked beside her in her doctor's gown, watching carefully. "Are you sure?" she asked fearfully. Sariah just nodded. Luna's diary was on her lap, open to a colourful page full of drawings of stars. When she entered the room, 3 children looked at her curiously. 2 were lying down. One had his arm in a cast, another had an IV in his arm, the third, a girl with a shaved head, sitting on the bed, hugged a teddy bear with one eye missing. Sora smiled tenderly. "Would you like to hear a story?" Their eyes lit up. The girl with the teddy bear dragged her chair closer to the bed. Sariah opened the diary. Her voice was still, but every word was full of love. She told the story of a girl who wanted to go to the circus, who dreamed of stars, who believed her mother was a queen. As she read, her voice trembled, but she didn't stop. The children laughed when she showed them the crooked drawings, and even a nurse passing by in the hallway stopped at the door to listen quietly. When she finished, she slowly closed the diary and looked at each of them. "Never forget," she said with tears in her eyes, but a soft smile on her face. "Never forget to smile for those who love you." The girl with the teddy bear hugged her stuffed animal tightly and smiled back at her shy but sincerely. Sariah looked down, feeling her heart tighten and open at the same time. It was as if by talking to these children who had no visitors, she could give her daughter a little piece of life that she couldn't give her that same night. Back in the hospital garden, she stood silently next to the newly planted tree. Louisa approached and sat down on the bench without saying anything. She just held out her hand. Sia looked at her with eyes still red from crying. She hesitated for a moment, then took her hand. Louisa's warm hand squeezed hers tightly as if promising never to let go. Carlos, who was watching from afar, also approached. There were no words. He just sat down on the other side and for a moment took Sariah's other hand. Neither of them said, "We're together." It wasn't necessary. Their eyes spoke for them. In their tired eyes there was pain, yes, but also a beginning, a new life trying to be born, even if there were scars. The wind moved the leaves of the tree as if it were a discreet greeting from someone smiling from somewhere, and the 3 of them stood there in silence, holding hands, learning that sometimes healing begins like this, with a simple gesture, without words, but full of truth. It was a normal morning in the hospital, one of those mornings when the noise of the medicine carts and the coming and go-zilling of footsteps drowned out any attempt at silence. Louisa was walking down the hall with a clipboard in her hand when something caught her attention. On a wooden bench against the wall was a piece of paper folded in half. There were no patients nearby, no one sitting there. It looked like it had been left there on purpose. Curious, she approached, picked up the sheet carefully, as if afraid of tearing it, unfolded it slowly, and stopped breathing. It was a simple child's drawing, colored with crayons. It showed a smiling girl in a blue dress holding the hands of 2 large figures. On the left was a bearded man with blue tears streaking down his face. On the right, a woman in a white coat smiled sweetly. In the bottom corner was a shaky but clear signature. Luna. Louisa felt her whole body tremble. Her heart raced. Her eyes filled with tears. "No, it can't be," she murmured, putting her hand to her mouth. She looked around as if someone were going to appear to explain it. The hallway was empty, the doors closed. Only the distant sound of a monitor in the intensive care unit could be heard. She pressed the drawing to her chest with trembling hands. The tears flowed without her being able to stop them. At that moment, Carlos appeared at the end of the hallway. He was walking slowly with his head down. When he saw how she was, he hurried over. "What happened, Louisa? Did something happen?" She couldn't answer right away. She just showed him the paper. Carlos took it carefully and his eyes widened as he understood what he was seeing. This is us," he said almost without a voice. "That's Luna." His face filled with silent tears. His hands trembled as he held the drawing as if it were made of glass. Louisa wiped her tears and whispered, "Who left this here, Carlos?" "No one knows." He shook his head, unable to say anything. He just pressed the paper against his chest, as if hugging his daughter for a moment. Sariah, still weak, appeared in her wheelchair, pushed by an assistant. Her gaze went straight to the drawing in Carlos's hands. She stretched out her arms, trembling, asking to see it. When she finally had it in her hands, a deep cry came from her chest. Her fingers touched the child's signature, as if she could feel the little hand that wrote it. "My little girl," she whispered, crying silently. The three of them stood there in the middle of the cold hospital hallway around a simple scratched-up piece of paper. But to them, it was much more than a drawing. It was a gift, a sign, a reminder that love does not disappear, that somehow the girl was still there, smiling with them. Louisa took a deep breath, trying to calm herself, and said softly, Maybe this is her way of saying she is at peace." The wind coming in through the hallway windows moved the white curtains, causing a slight chill. They looked at each other in silence, their eyes filled with tears, knowing they would never have an explanation, but they didn't need one. Because in that drawing left behind mysteriously, Luna had smiled again, and that was all that mattered. In the hospital archives, an old thick envelope held years of silence. At the top, written in red, was unidentified patient, Mrs. X. Louisa entered slowly, asked the employee to hand her the documents, and with trembling hands placed a new file on the table. Now there was no room for anonymity. In the name field, written in firm letters, was Sariah Herrera. The pen moved slowly, filling in each space. Age, history, accident, coma. But between those cold lines was something that didn't belong there. A mother's love, the pain of loss, the faith that kept her breathing, the hope that was reborn in strange hands. The old file was stamped as closed, and the new one stored in the cabinet spoke not only of a body that survived an accident. It spoke of a woman who had a name, a daughter, memories, guilt, and hope. She would never again be just Mrs. X. Now she had a history, now she had a voice, and it is at this moment that I need to ask you, what if it were you? How many people have you already forgotten just because they seemed to be asleep? How many hands grew cold because no one believed there was still life in them? And if it were you in that bed, waiting for a glance, waiting for someone who wouldn't give up, who would be there for you? Tell me in the comments. If you were in Carlos's or Louisa's place, what would you do? Would you run away from the pain, or would you have the courage to stay? If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, activate the bell to receive the next videos, and don't leave without clicking on the video that appears on your screen right now. It's another touching story that makes thousands of people think differently about the value of love and forgiveness. I assure you, you won't be the same after watching.